Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hello.
Welcome back.
I'm Larry.
I'm Denise.
Oh, well, I'm so glad that we get to be socially close. No distancing.
There's
for
no
us.
distance,
No,
yeah.
No.
So we get to dance in this Sunday experience again together.
Yes.
And I know you will be a blessing, as I will be. We've had some challenges this week, so we're going to be talking about those as well as talking about the book. So this is our week 4, and we're in You Can't Sleep Through Your Awakening. And I left the book over there. So
why don't you go get the book and I will begin talking about You Can't Sleep Through Your Awakening.
I think Margie's going to bring it.
Oh, Margie's going to bring it. And so I think sometimes it's important because when we're in a place where we use words all the time and we have our own understanding of what they are, it becomes sort of a jargon that sometimes we need to just back up and unpack what we mean. So there's 2 words in this book title. You can't sleep through your awakening. So what do we mean by awakening? What do we mean by awakening? Well, we're talking about spiritual awakening, and there could be a very wide variety of how people interpret what spiritual awakening is. So I think it would be really good for us to talk maybe from our own perspective, and Denise and I may have a different perspective on what that is, but it's important for us to say, where are we headed? Why should we wake up? And what are we waking up to? And what does it mean to be awake? I mean, we certainly know what it means to be awake in the context of our physicality, of our body, but do we know what it means to be awake spiritually? So thank you for the cues. I see you back there. So I'll start, and then I'd love for you to share.
Sounds beautiful.
Yeah. So awakening in the context of spirituality is for us to recognize that we are more than what we appear to be. You know, when we are strictly in a sense of our physicality or materiality, I know myself to be a body, I know myself to be a mind, and spirituality is really something much deeper and something much broader and something much more expansive. And to awaken, to me, is to know a sense of being that transcends the mere physicalness of my being, of my body and my mind. So when you think about awakening, what does that mean to you? Or how do you know that, or how do you experience that?
Right. So for me, spiritual awakening is awakening or recognizing that I am a boundless, radiant energy of spirit, of God, of divine, of essence, that my true essence I call a sacred, authentic self, that it's not attached to a body, it's not attached to an identity as a person, but it is vast and it is connected to the one presence and one power. I call God, the infinite. And so it is, waking up is saying that I am not this sense of a separate self, which is what our ego has us be doing. So it's sort of the opposite of that. And so waking up to understand where my identity lies, that's sort of for me what it is. Yeah.
And I think a key word in what you just said is identity. And I think identity is huge because it is our I am. We often say, I am a man, I'm a butcher, baker, candlestick maker, I'm a husband, I'm an accountant, a doctor. We bring our I am to these things which are part of our physical reality, part of what we do in the world, and our gender. And yet, when we're talking about spiritual identity, none of those things apply to us. And in fact, our spiritual identity is actually universal. We all come from the same cloth. We're all cut from the same spiritual cloth. And our source is one. We say there's one presence, one power, one life. And we are that one life in expression. And so when we understand that we may have a role in this world as a husband or as a doctor, as a lawyer, whatever, that is not who we are in our essence. That is how we're showing up in this contracted version of expression of the one presence. And that's the distinction. I think that's what really waking up is. And falling asleep is to continue to believe that I am just those things that I can identify with, my possessions, my job, how much money I have, where I live, that define me and my identity. So it's almost like an identity crisis that we go through.
That's right.
We've forgotten who we truly are.
Yeah, and as our spirituality blossoms, that as we begin to have a full discovery of this identity, we have a full realization of our divinity, and that is what our way shower Jesus had. Is, we see Jesus as also a man who became awake, who became aware of his divinity. But he was fully realized. You and I, especially me, have a ways to go to have that full realization here on earth. But I'm getting there, and I have a lot more wakeful moments. In other words, I do go to sleep to my sense of a separate self, but I wake up. And so the saying is, it's not how often you fall asleep, but how quickly you awaken is what matters. So that's where a paradigm is happening, is that more and more of us are waking up to who and what we are. And so speaking of that, I'm going to sort of jump into falling asleep. And
is it okay if I nudge you if you do? Actually, we nudge each other all the time. That's part of why a relationship
yes,
is.
Please. If I fall over, just pick me up. And
I mean that literally and metaphorically, though. I mean spiritually. Right. We do that for each other. We
do. But I do want to get serious, because I do want to talk about the tragedy that has happened this week with our police and with our African-American brother, George Floyd. And so this is a moment that I have felt distraught, despair, anxious, forlorn, and deep sadness. And so what I got clear about this morning, it took me quite some time to sort of process through all of this, and I'm still in it. I'm imagining you are as well. And that is, I began to try to understand what the protesters must be experiencing, that they would need to revert to more violence. And I said, I'm guessing they're feeling powerless. And as soon as I said that word, powerless, my whole body went, yeah, that's what's going on. That's what was going on for me. Now, my belief wasn't necessarily the same as theirs, that Black lives don't matter, or, their dignity and worth. But my belief to that was, humanity hasn't evolved past this egoic sense of self, still has hatred and prejudice. And that was that thought that we haven't evolved as spiritual and human beings was what caused that sense of powerlessness. We're not going to get this. There's so many of us still asleep. We're not going to get this. And when I finally got what was the belief in me that was causing the suffering and the feeling of powerlessness, I began to go, oh, well, that's not the truth. That's what's showing up right here in this small instance. And it was horrific and brutal and extremely sad. But I don't want to identify as us, that all police officers don't revert to violence. All white people don't murder, right? All black people don't cause crimes. So none of that is true. That's what we have to go to, is what do we believe about this? Yeah. Because today we're talking about believing is seeing, right?
That's right. And I think we can look at this situation, and I feel the same pain as you've described. And there is a sense that this has been going on for so long. I'm old enough to remember the civil rights movement and the horrendous things that were happening back then. And it seemed like there was a great wake-up call, and there was an awakening, and there was some change, and the civil rights movement got off the ground. Sometimes because there was a visible demonstration of how inhumane man can be to other men in those protests, those peaceful protests in which fire hoses were, trained on these peaceful protesters, and there was an outrage. It was seared into the conscience of all of us that this was a great injustice, and those who were being portrayed as being inferior or to be prejudiced against were actually the ones who were superior in how they were showing up in the face of this prejudice that was foisted against them and the violence that was perpetrated against them. So I am hopeful that this event, which has gotten worldwide and global visibility, will be a wake-up call, and that we will all feel, or more of us will feel, that we need to awaken the heart of humanity again, which is for us to know who and what we truly are, and to bring forth that love and compassion and that humanity towards each other. And yet we also have to realize that we didn't come to that overnight. Our prejudices, most of them were developed early in our life, that came from stories that were told to us, the culture that we grew up in, our parents or whoever the influencers were in our particular life. And so we come by those beliefs honestly, in the sense that they were developed by those people who we believed were telling us the truth all the time. When they told us the sun was going to come up tomorrow, and by God, the sun came up tomorrow. And so we continue to believe that these were speaking words of truth. And when people said that these people are good and these people are bad and we're better than those people, those beliefs were formed. And now, though, we're adults and we can make our own decisions. And hopefully we're waking up to realize that we can see things fresh. We don't have to believe the stories of our past. We don't have to believe the prejudices that were given to us.
And it's our opportunity, right, to do self-examination, to look within our own self, to see what beliefs are still running our lives. And that's an important piece, this self-examination. And I look to other leaders outside of myself during these times, and Michelle Obama is one of those. She's always so wise in this time, and she says, we do it's up to all of us to heal this planet. It's not just the Black community or this community. It's every one of us that has to do that. And she says, and it starts with self-examination, to look within ourselves to see what's still there, and to listen to those whose lives might look different than ours. And that's an important piece, because really the end result wants to be compassion, empathy, and understanding. That's what we want. We want that compassion and justice as well. So that doesn't mean we close our eyes. Martin Luther King was an amazing, beautiful spiritual leader who brought so much wisdom to the civil rights and humanity. And so we don't want to lose sight. And I know that he would be talking to these groups that were using violence against violence and saying, that's never been what makes a world work. And so somewhere along the line, we have to ask and be humbled, ask God for help, and to know that someone needs to be that echo of peace. I was listening to Reverend Gregory Geis, a Unity minister, and he was talking about that. Someone needs to be the echo of peace, which is a beautiful idea. I hope to be the echo of peace. I hope to know that we can trust God will have our right answers, and to always go within, because it's the answer's never the thinking about it, but it's in the heart of surrendering this over to God. That these atrocities can't be thought through. We have to give them over to a higher ideal.
And I think that really is if there is a prescription for how we are to respond to this, certainly we understand the gut response, which we see demonstrated in the streets where people are angry and they're violent. We understand that. There's a part of us that can get triggered in that way. However, what we know is that if we are here to remember who we are and to listen to the spiritual teachings and the spiritual teachers, as Jesus certainly was one that we follow. And, when he was wrongfully accused and they came to arrest him, and, one of the people with Jesus, pulled out the sword and cut off the ear of one of the people that was coming to arrest him, Jesus said, "Put your sword away." Because even though Jesus was at the receiving end of this inequality, of these trumped up charges that were clearly not based upon truth, he knew that if he reverted, if he became someone who he was not, as opposed to staying in the heart of his true being, that he would only be inflaming the situation, and he would be adding more forgetfulness. He would be putting people to sleep as he fell asleep to his true nature. So I think, this is what we need to remember when we look for how are we going to act, how are we going to respond. It's not going to be coming from that place where we feel we have to change something in the world from a state of fear. But we ask ourselves, who am I? We feel the connection to God. We feel the connection to love. And then ask, how then can I respond from this knowing? And
Yes.
then we will be given wise guidance and do as Martin Luther King did. Hate does not drive out hate. Only love does that.
Right. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive hate. Only love. He also said, power without love is reckless and abusive. And love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. Isn't that beautiful? I love
Yes.
that last line. Justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. So he uses the word correcting, not annihilating, not destroying, but correcting, which to me is about accountability and justice, right? There's a way to go about when we act out of how we've agreed to be. We have a constitution, we have a Declaration of Independence, and when we act outside of those principles, of those ideology, then we need to have a way to come back to ourselves without destroying each other. And that's what Dr. King would do.
Yes. And that comes from that notion that
Yes.
You know, we believe that the divine, God, by whatever name you call it, is not something that is out there judging us for our behavior, but that it is the presence of love itself that doesn't want to judge us or punish us, but only to heal us from the notion that we are separate from that love. And Martin Luther King really got that. So knowing that the work is not to, you know, eye for an eye, which is that old idea of separation, and that, you know, you have taken my good away from me, that to know that the good that I'm seeking is within me always. And if I see injustice in the world, it's for me to, first of all, make sure that I am connected to that sense of well-being within me, and then see what I can do in the world to correct the injustices that I see, but not from a place of anger and retribution, which is what, you know, so many people feel is the way to make change in the world. It still lives as a very high ideal. Obviously, we still go to war and all of these things, but that doesn't address the underlying feeling of separation. You even if you defeat your enemy, if you haven't dealt with that sense of that shadow belief that you hold inside of yourself, that it will continue to create discomfort for you, and you'll have to look for a new enemy, which we do.
Right.
We'll find another enemy to replace it.
And that sense of feeling powerless can become overwhelming. And when we buy into the idea that we are powerless over this authority or powerless over anything, then we may revert to very pathetic strategies of getting our needs met to be heard. So one of the things
especially when we think, you're what's wrong with me.
You're what's wrong with me,
or that situation is what's causing my suffering.
Right.
We don't have enough, we haven't awakened enough to know that the cause of our discomfort, which we say all the time, the cause of our discomfort and the source of our discomfort and the source of our well-being are where? Within us. And that very high teaching is the truth, because can only be one presence and one power in the universe, and I am part of that, which means I am part of the love, the infinite love, and the peace and the joy and the love and all of the well-being that I could ever look for. Oh, and there's a bird flying through the sanctuary. He doesn't know.
Oh, there's two.
He doesn't know. Oh, we have
Come
two
in.
birds. Well, they understand social distancing.
Birds.
They're not very close. So that whole notion of the well-being that I'm seeking in the world that I think somebody else is keeping from me is what drives us to conflict and war. And so it's the reversal of that. It's the recognition that what I'm seeking, I already am. I've been made in the image and likeness of God. And that's what brings me back. And when I'm in that place, then my action is not a reaction. It's an action based upon a sense of wholeness. And then I bring wisdom to the world.
Right.
So I think that's the difference in what we see is happening now and what would be the enlightened approach.
And to be awake, you could still want to be heard, right? But it's a peaceful march. That's what happened here in Honolulu, as we had people gathering together to say, that's not right. There's an injustice that's happened, and that's standing for something else. Martin Luther King said, a riot is the language of the unheard. So, a lot of people don't feel heard. And that is their strategy for getting heard, is to make a lot of ruckus.
Yes,
so part of
it does get a lot of attention. That's
it does.
True.
But part of what we can do, you and I, is begin to listen to those who feel marginalized. Listen to those who feel harmed. And it begins at home. It begins in our own circles. And it's not just always with our governments. It begins here. It begins here by having empathy and compassion for others as they walk through this devastating experience. Their experience may be very different than yours, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And everybody, no matter how they act, they're coming from some basic need, some feeling that is some unmet need that leads to a particular feeling. Even when someone is acting in a violent way.
Yes.
If you were to go right down to that to the core of what is motivating that behavior, it's some basic need that we can all relate to and have compassion for. But they didn't learn how to get those needs met in a way that are not violent.
Right.
And so they use violence because in some sense they then take on a power that they don't have in the society otherwise.
So today we're also going to be talking a little bit about the observer effect, and also about we don't necessarily see what is, we see what we are, our consciousness. So you can't see without you in the view. You can't see the world as it is, you see the world as you are. So we see from a lens of our own belief systems. And there's a little cartoon I've got here with a beautiful rhinoceros. We're showing that now. So this is the reality, yes? I mean, I love that because it's a picture of a rhinoceros, and every picture he creates has this horn in it because he is creating from his own awareness. And we are all creating, whether we're creating from our wholeness, a sense of sacred authentic self, our Christed being, or our limited sense of self, our shadow self. Either way, we are co-creating. So we want to be mindful of that. You want to jump in?
No, you're doing great. Okay. I'm ready to jump in when you're finished with your
I took
thought.
a breath, so.
Yeah. So, and I think this idea that, we all our eyes may all, have a capacity to let an image come in, but how that image gets formed in us has everything to do with our brain and the conditioning that we have had. So we don't all see the same thing. We could all say, it's plain as day what we're looking at here, but two people who have had different backgrounds and conditions can look at the same situation, and one could be highly triggered, the other person could have no reaction at all. So they're looking at the same thing. In other words, the mechanics are the same, but the meaning that is made up in which that image then becomes a picture of something and a response to that image can vary from person to person. That's what allows for the variety and the diversity of interpretations and how people see the world.
Right.
And as you were saying, if someone was, raised in a particular culture that you weren't raised in, or in, a socioeconomic situation, their worldview was going to be different if you were raised in, a more affluent background. So this is where, we are all spiritual beings, and that's true, and that's universal. But how we have taken on these beliefs has everything to do with the variety and the diversity of experiences that we've grown up with. So there is no such thing, and quantum physics bears this out now, is there is no such thing as objective reality. In other words, objective reality would be that there's only one reality, and we all agree, and it never changes. And that absolutely is not true, certainly from the reason I just described, but even from the quantum physics perspective, they talk about the observer effect at the subatomic realm, which is when the scientists were looking at the very smallest particles, subatomic particles, then they were trying to figure out whether light was appearing as a particle or a wave. And it seemed like one time it would be a wave and one time it would be a particle, and they couldn't get this concrete definition of the nature of light. And at some point they realized that it was when they were trying to measure the light, is that it would affect whether it would be seen as a particle or as a wave. In other words, that the introduction of observation in what would seem to be an experiment which should have no effect from watching it, because that isn't intervening in the outcome, but the very act of observing there is, we do enter into reality just by our presence.
So we
And,
alter reality just by paying attention to it.
That's what it seems to be. And
Yeah.
of course, this really frustrates the heck out of scientists because they don't like anything that sort of, flows in and out of, it's true this way and it's
Right.
possible to be this and it's possible to be that. But really, the spiritual view is we live in a field of infinite possibilities. We say that Jesus said, with God, all things are possible. And so the possibilities that exist as pure probability can become a specific event as we bring our perception
Right.
to that field.
Beautiful.
And then something which could be this or that becomes a this or a that according to the belief that we
Right.
it's like the color wash that we put on that field of infinite
Beautiful.
possibilities.
So we have an infinite field of possibilities, anything. And what we do to create that's the wave, to create that particle is we decide what it means. So we create a thought around a life experience. So the life experience is an infinite field of possibilities, and we create the particle by giving it meaning. That means I'm not supported. This happened. That means Black lives don't matter. This happened. That means white people, blah, blah, blah. We create meaning out of what we see in the world, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and it usually comes from what we've come to believe over a period of time, not based on what we're seeing actually, but the lens through which we see is the
Yes.
lens that has been created over conditioning, years of conditioning.
So this idea of the observer effect and that we create our reality by our perception, we'd like to show this little clip to you now, and we want you to just stare at this dot that's in the middle of the picture. She waved to me. So hopefully you saw the beautiful colors when you stared at the dot. And not everyone, but most of us fill it in with color. The mind remembers what happened in the past and projects that past history on our present day awareness. So that's creating our own reality through our past, yes?
Yes. Yeah, that statement that you said earlier, we don't see life as it is, we see life as we are. I think it's such an important awareness. If for no other reason that when we're finding ourselves with a really strong judgment
Yeah.
about something, just asking ourselves, okay, where is this coming from? Do I absolutely know that this is true? If I'm calling someone, I'm labeling someone or a situation, even when we say this is really bad, I mean, how do you know it's really bad? I mean, we never really, if we don't enlarge the context of what happens in life, if we don't enlarge the context of other people in which we understand that they are human beings who have feelings and needs, in which, they have come to be this person that displays this behavior, then we are really just projecting our own forgetfulness upon their forgetfulness. We're forgetting who we are and projecting that forgetfulness upon them. And if we really want to be a part of transformation in this world, then we have to remember who we are and then help them remember who they are.
Yes,
Who is
beautiful.
the original
We're here to support each other.
self.
Yeah.
The blessing that was born.
Yes. And I was watching Muji, one of our dear non-dual teachers as well. Muji says, what if this were just a play directed by God? And it was to activate in us this social change that needs to happen. And that maybe it's the final piece that we've been waiting for, that we knew that we were awaked beings, and this is just some of the stuff that's still stuck in the consciousness that still needs to be healed. So in the Q process, we talk about being grateful that this situation has pointed out to me what still needs to be healed in me. And that's how we can use this to awaken and bless humanity, and to not reenact it, but to heal it. That's what we want to do.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the one silver lining in this, besides that it is being disseminated across the whole world, and that many, many people are getting to see this and feel the shock of that, is that it's awakening in us our desire. You know, sometimes that when we live in a safe world, you know, we forget that a lot of people don't live in a safe world, and that they are subject to oppression, and subject to being treated unfairly, and subject to violence, and that we can wake up to, you know, that pain body, that collective pain body, to say, how can we be a part of healing that, which can transfer into our politics, and the laws that we make, socioeconomically, and all the way down the line. So that could be it.
Would you be willing, Reverend Larry, to do a closing prayer for us to sort of close this time out? Okay, beautiful. I'm going to let you stand right out here, and I'm going to sit down here.
So let's just all take a collective deep breath together and just let it out. One more time. As we just acknowledge that from the human perspective, these challenges seem insurmountable at times. We feel the frustration, we feel the deep feelings of sadness, and we allow ourselves to grieve as our way shower, Jesus. He had his moments in which he felt the pain and the grief and became frustrated with the lack of progress, and he turned over the tables, and he chided his disciples who continually fell asleep. And yet, there was a knowing in Jesus, and there is a knowing in each of us, who each of us is made in the image and likeness of this one presence, this one power, this one life, this one love. And it is in this knowing, it is in this remembering, that we have the capacity to be with life and to be safe, to be okay, to feel whole, to feel complete, to feel love, to feel peace, because that is what we are made of. That is our true nature. That is our essence. That is who we were created to be. And to give expression to that is our spiritual opportunity in every moment. So we realize we can't do this of our own accord. Our own simple surface-minded approach to life will not work. It has not worked, and it will not continue to work in these moments where we are challenged. And so we allow ourselves to be lifted up by this deeper knowing of the truth of our being, to move into our heart, to breathe into our heart in every moment and ask, what would love do? What would peace do? And let me be so guided by the truth of my being that I contribute to the solution, that I contribute to transformation of the planet. As I heal my own heart, as I heal any sense of separation, then I offer that healing message, that harmonizing message, that transforming message to all those whom I meet. So we thank you, God, that your presence and your power and love are greater than anything and anyone in this world. It has always been that way. This is our salvation, our liberation, and our hope for the complete healing that we are all here to accomplish in our little way and in our collective way. May we always remember your presence and your power, that they're here and they are now, and they are up to any task before us. And so it is.